Okay, second attempt at a video because my other one was too long and it's taken way too long to upload. 8.3 assignment, Future of Operational Psychology in regards to the U.S. military. First off, aspects in Williams and Kennedy, Chapter 1, aspects, aspects that are still going to continue. Operational psychologists will conduct assessments for special operations, assist in SEER training, which would be the training of instructors and training of the soldiers participating in SEER, and also serve as safety observers, make sure things don't get too out of hand or anything. Also, they'll continue, sorry about it fading in and out like that, continue to do security clearances, attempting to rule out mental disorders, alcohol and drug disorders, inappropriate sexual behavior, relationships, and basically deduce if people have a proclivity to blackmail. So eliminate those people from obviously obtaining access to secured documents, which could jeopardize operations. Uh, Repatriation of personnel. One of the things that we normally speak in terms of POWs, detainees, helping them become repatriated to society and to their various nations. Another aspect that will probably see an increase is them working with soldiers returning from deployment. I know as an OIF 1 veteran, when we came back, it was about 2 months before we were given any uh, reassimilation training and how to readjust to not being in a combat environment. That is a big adjustment, especially when you've been there for about a year or so. Adjusting to our roles in the family because roles have changed while the soldier was gone. Like I said, we received ours about 2 months after we got back. So by then we had already pretty much made adjustments or were, comfortable with where we were. But now, upon returning from deployment, soldiers receive such training a lot sooner. So it's part of their reintegration training. They're still going to, operational psychologists, still going to perform counterintelligence and counterterrorism operations. Obviously, the focus on this more so with national security now pertains to, I guess, here in the States, but also it is a threat when you're deployed. So you still have to maintain that. Operational psychologists will still assist in it. Performing indirect assessments of the enemy within the area of operation, psychological autopsies, and which kind of goes along with indirect assessment, and consulting on interrogations. Now, I would just like to take a moment. Usually, most of the time when you mention interrogation, people tend to think of torture, and they're two different things. Just because someone's being interrogated does not mean that they're being tortured. So, interrogation may be intense, but it's not necessarily torture. So, also, assisting operational commanders in improving commanders' decision making as it pertains to conducting combat related operations. So that's pretty much what operational psychology is doing now. That's what they'll continue to do in the future. In terms of effectiveness, I cited two examples. First one I mentioned in week 4 of assignment 1, the case study when I profiled General Noriega during the invasion of Panama. He fled to a church. Obviously, the military could not enter the church to retrieve him. So, his operational psychologist that did a profile on him found out that he was not a fan of rock music. He hated it. So, they set up some speakers, started blasting it, and then he just eventually surrendered. So, that's an example of the effectiveness of operational psychology. The other is the case study that was mentioned in Shoemate and Borum, and I closed out most of my notes. Sorry about that. Um, Basically, in that case study, they were trying to find a mole within it was a national intelligence agency that was trying to find a mole, and they consulted operational psychologists who recommended that they had a uh, research study that was currently ongoing on security procedures, and they used the opportunity. to, let's see, excuse me, find my spot here. Uh, the study could provide cover for briefly interviewing selected officials on security practices and recommended strategies, sometimes used in psychological research on deception. The basic premise is that when a person wishes not to respond or to avoid a particular stimulus, they will do so consistently. Therefore, they'll create a pattern in consistently avoiding or not responding to certain stimulus, which would show their proclivity to blackmail, or basically their behavior or their responses would show that they were the mole. And they did identify the person they were looking for, and that person was arrested and charged with espionage. Um, in terms of dangers and potential pitfalls, first off, increased role of interrogation involvement. Um, not when What I mean by that is you have psychologists that are actually participating as interrogators in an interrogation, just with their psychological training and background. Um, Obviously, torture is a contradiction of principle A, uh, but one thing you have to look at is also principle B. Me being a military person, former military, retired now, I'm a more principle B minded person. So, what one person may see as torture, I would probably see as intense, especially when dealing with terrorists or people who are threats to national security. I don't foresee that individual as a potential patient, which is often the viewpoint of the APA in situations like that. They tend to look at it from a clinical perspective, to where I look at it from the perspective of military and national security. As mentioned by Stahl and Stevenson, there certainly needs to be coordination between the APA and the DoD to eliminate such ethical and legal dilemmas. Um, Also, you have potential danger or pitfall is multiple or dual roles of psychologists, most likely, and this is something that I touched on in the 8.1 discussion, to where my prediction was you're going to have people who aren't aware of the difference between operational and clinical military psychologists, and they're going to get word that a psychologist performed a certain operational function, and they're just going to assume that all psychologists are trained in that. So you're going to have commanders potentially going to a clinical psychologist and asking them to perform operational duties. Um, my experience in military, you wear a lot of hats, you fulfill a lot of duties and responsibilities. So most likely, I foresee some clinical psychologists will most likely use what operational knowledge or what knowledge they have of operational psychology, assist a commander to the best of their abilities. Hopefully, they will disclose that. And there's going to be some mission success, and basically, the Army is going to seek to copy that. So, you would probably have people entering into clinical military psychology, receiving some operational psychology training. Another danger pitfall, certainly psychologists need to be aware of their analytical bias. They need to look at it from the perspective of the person they're analyzing and not from their perspective as an analyst. Um, Also, limited access to resources and their comrades while deployed. You, there are instances where you have, say, internet access for 10 people, but you have 20 people or 200 people on a particular base. So that can limit the access that you have. Granted, you still have internet, and most people seem to think that internet's everywhere, and the Army does wonders with technology, but still at times it can be limited. And there's obviously the area of consent for me. I can see that as an issue, as it's mentioned, but not particularly. I don't foresee an enemy or a terrorist as someone that you have to obtain consent from. That's just my opinion. You know, they made their choice, and hey, you got to stick with their side. Um, so in that terms, I don't foresee consent being as big an issue, but I can from the perspective that the APA often looks at things from a clinical perspective. So um, that's it. It was kind of quick and short. I didn't go into as much detail as I did before. Like I said, having problems uploading, I always seem to do. Hopefully someday I'll get it straightened out. And with that, the best to all of you. Thank you for watching my video. And fortunately, we didn't win today, but go Panthers. Keep pounding. And I wish you all the best of luck in your endeavors. And a Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Bye.